Hello and welcome to the What the What podcast. We are the podcast where we are talking all things pop culture, nostalgia, 90s, 80s, 2000s, whatever. I don't even have words in front of me. I'm just making it up as I go along, and we're excited to be with you tonight. I am Eric Creech, and with me tonight we have Kyle Whitley, and joining us on the What the What line, Ashby Brame. You can acknowledge yourself here.
Hello.
Okay, cool.
I like how this is called the What the What line. That's
The what line. Yes.
I like that. That's
yes.
good.
Well,
That's right.
When we have, maybe one day we can have like actual listeners like call in.
Mm-hmm.
We have that option on Podbean where we can.
Maybe.
Yeah, we can do that one day.
Well, we can just set up the spare phone with the number. And
Yeah.
just give people that number.
Could and like, hey, call us at 1-800-555-WHAT.
Yes.
Dear What the What?
Oh, how's y'all's week been going, y'all?
Okay.
It's going.
It's going.
I've been sick,
Been sick.
but I don't have COVID.
You tested
I
negative.
went and got a test, and I was negative.
That's good.
And my
Nice.
symptoms don't align necessarily with COVID anyway. But just to be safe, I got tested.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right, just to be
safety
safe.
first.
Mhm.
Safety first.
I've been super busy with work and then trying to, drown my sorrows of busyness in TV shows at night.
Oh, nice. Nice. One of my favorite
Yeah.
current TV shows is WandaVision.
Of course.
It's a nice little classic throwback to the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Was I right? Is it not delightful?
It is
It is.
wonderful. Wow.
Right?
I enjoy it.
It is fantastic. It's just a joy. So many things I can't wait to talk about WandaVision when the time comes.
I know.
Next year, if we keep up
So
with this
many
current
things
pace.
to
But
unpack.
So many things. And there's still 6 episodes left. I mean, it's crazy. Oh,
I
my
know.
goodness. So, but we're not
yeah,
talking
a lot
superheroes
of-
today.
Oh, go ahead.
Right.
Oh, no,
She
go-
says, well,
go-
actually, I was.
Well, actually, go ahead,
was
Ashby.
going to,
Go
and you
ahead.
said no.
I was gonna say, I think I was gonna say that a lot of shows have finally started back after very long hiatuses because of filming and production halts.
Mhm.
And so I've been, diving into new episodes of Prodigal Son, which is one of my favorite new shows. They had their first season last year. It's got Lou Diamond Phillips, who anyone who was watching movies in the 80s knows who he is. And then also the CW is finally starting back some of their repertoire. So Nancy Drew aired this past week, and that's one of my favorite new shows from last year.
I have a question for you,
And
Ashby.
then,
Are you watching
Yes.
Walker?
oh, that was what I was going to talk about next,
Okay. I saw.
Anyone who knows me knows
Yeah.
that I was devastated about Supernatural ending.
Yes.
And so I'm glad that there's somewhere that I can pick back up with watching Jared Padalecki on my screen every week.
And I'm just impressed you pronounced his last name correctly the first time because I would have butchered it several times.
Well, I mean, I've been saying it for 15 years, so if I haven't gotten it right by now. But anyway, I think that we decided at some point we were maybe going to talk about 90s drama shows at some point that are our favorites. But in my house in the 90s, you did not miss an episode of Walker, Texas Ranger. That was family
Saturday
time.
night at 10 o'clock.
That's right.
Yep.
So
For those of
I'm
us who did
excited
not
for a
have,
reboot.
for those of us who did not have Kenan and Kel and Nick at Night and all that other stuff, you watched Walker.
We watched
That's
Walker,
right.
Texas Ranger as well. And Keenan and Kel.
Well, whoop-de-doo.
Just say.
What?
Is Flashback yet?
No,
haven't
Flash is
checked.
not back yet. Supergirl's not back yet. Legends, sort of the Arrowverse, but now minus Arrow, R.I.P., has not started back yet. I think they're all slated to
Batwoman
start in
has started
February.
back.
Yeah, that's true.
That's true.
Batwoman
Batwoman
has started
has.
back.
I stopped watching Batwoman for very complicated reasons, which I won't get into here. So I wasn't aware when that was coming back because I didn't watch the last few episodes of the first season, and I won't be watching it when it comes back. So I wasn't sure about that one, but all the other, I guess now it's the Flashverse shows are coming
As it
back, and the
deserves.
newest one in the catalog, Superman and Lois, will have a 2-hour season premiere on, I think, February 23rd.
That's my birthday.
That is your birthday.
Nice.
Yes.
Congrats.
Thanks.
I did see where they did not pick up the Arrow spinoff, Green Arrow and the Canaries. They did not pick
Right,
that up.
yeah.
There was a backdoor pilot filmed and aired as the next to last episode in season 8 of Arrow, but they did not pick it up.
Right.
And just for clarity's sake, it's a terrible name. I like the Flashverse better, but the CW
Right.
is actually calling it the CW verse, which is
That's
stupid.
dumb.
No.
It is
No,
dumb, and I
absolutely
agree
We
not.
won't
with that.
acknowledge that.
But
Yeah,
I,
it
but I
makes me
just
sad
did.
because, not that Arrow has a predominantly female following. I would never claim that. But I know that Supernatural does. And both Supernatural and Arrow tried female forward spinoffs, and neither one of them picked up. And I was just really confused on why. Supernatural tried to do a Wayward Daughters
Mm-hmm.
spinoff, and then of course Arrow tried with the Canaries, and I liked both backdoor pilots, but they never went anywhere, and I was just really sad about that.
From what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, but from my research, I really think the pandemic had a big part to do with Green Arrow and the Canaries not getting picked up.
That makes sense.
Like it was going to go into production, and that halted everything. And since they did not get started, they didn't want to have actors and production crews tied up in it, so they just, So
Right.
one more thing the pandemic has claimed this year or last year. So
I mean, I feel like this year is just a continuation of last year.
yeah, but hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel, and
Hopefully.
that's
I think
coming.
so.
That's coming from me. Okay, I'm going to be optimistic here. That's coming from me. So let's put on our positive pants. Let's not be negative Neds and Nellies.
This is a good year.
Let's
I'm ready.
put on our positive
Yeah.
pants.
Yeah. And we're going to look forward to 2020 fun because it's going to be awesome.
It is.
I'm still holding out hope we get to go to Universal this year. So,
Yes.
I'm getting a
Yes.
house and a child this year, so
Yes.
Universal
Yeah.
probably isn't happening for me.
well, maybe not for you, but
You and Ashby can go.
we'll go.
Yeah.
We'll go to Harry Potter World. So
Just-
anyway,
Yeah,
Put me
we'll write back about how awesome it is.
Just FaceTime me on
Yeah.
all the rides.
that's right. What do you mean? Your kid can go to that. It'll be your kid. It'll be your kid's first memory of hanging out with
you're
your,
open
paid
with
for
your
it.
weird friends. I mean,
If you're open paid to get there and everything else, I'm down.
we'll take up a GoFundMe. We have fans.
Sure.
So
Mm-hmm.
if each of our 300 Instagram followers tips in like $5,
Well, that's
That's
true.
right.
of course, that's also $5 coming from me, Ashby, and you. So
I can handle
but
that.
I can handle that. So. Anywho, well, anyway, tonight we're very grateful for you joining us. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcast. And of course, rate and review us 5 stars only, or we'll cancel. We will close down your department at your school if you do not give us 5 stars.
That's right.
Just yeah, we're just we're
we
not
have
gonna
that power.
we're not going to give you any money. That's it. So, also, please follow us on our social media channels by searching for What the What Media
All one word.
on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. We're also on Twitter at WTW_media. And please share this with your friends. We only have 306 Instagram followers from my last check. If we had 1,000, we maybe could drop that number down to like $4 a person or something. I mean, that would
Right?
be so.
That's called economies of scale.
Also, if you follow us on YouTube, we don't have a lot of stuff on there. We do have some videos, but all of our podcasts get posted to YouTube as well. But if we get 100 followers there, we can start using custom URL. And since we've had the channel for over a year, I don't even know what number we're at now, but we're not at 100. So
We haven't pushed it
This
either.
is a
We're telling you now.
partnership, guys.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you have to get us to 100 followers on YouTube, and we'll commit to more content.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
We'll put it out there once there's people there to watch it.
absolutely.
That's right.
So, anyhow, Ashby,
Well, last time on the pod, you heard us talk about Ant-Man. We got back into it.
Yeah.
First podcast for
Old
a
Tic-Tac.
few weeks, and we dove back into the MCU, which was fun.
running that Infinity Gauntlet. I'm already out of breath.
That's right. That's right. We are committed to finishing. It's been a year. It's going to take even longer, but
Yes, we will.
Here we are.
We will commit to that for sure.
that's right.
Yes.
Can't stop,
On today's
won't stop.
episode, though, we are taking a
Deep dive.
into Mr. Holland's Opus. If you, like us, haven't seen this movie since middle school, Here's a spoiler warning. Maybe it's time for a Disney Plus rewatch before you take a listen to this episode. That being said, though, we're going to let Kyle take us on a little trip down memory lane.
I wake up. I look around. I'm in a classroom in North Johnston Middle School, which is technically a micro-elementary school now.
So you didn't wake up in the morning feeling like P. Diddy?
I did not.
Okay.
That was years later.
Okay.
This year is middle school. I'm in the band room. I'm not sure if I'm in first chair or second chair saxophone, because Chris Rode and I made an agreement in 6th grade that we would trade it off each and every other year. And whoever was in second would have to fight off the person behind them, but would never challenge the one above them. So I got it in 7th grade. He got it in 6th and 8th.
That's a pretty good deal if you can get it.
we had it worked out. Ashley Watson didn't stand a chance. In this room is where we met the amazing man, Mr. Robert Jackson.
Oh, Bob Jackson.
That would transform all of our lives in some way or another. But I remember arriving this one day and noticing Mr. Jackson wasn't there. He wasn't in the room. And instead, there was a substitute sitting off on a chair, and in the middle of the room rolled in a giant box-style television with a VCR beneath it. And here we met Mr. Holland and heard of his Opus. Glenn Holland is a professional musician who would like to spend more time composing in 1965, so he takes up a teaching at a local high school. Little does he realize how little free time there is as a teacher, and initially he is frustrated in his inability to get through to the students, but over time he becomes quite competent at his profession and in fact has a number of successes. At home he is devastated to learn that his infant son is deaf, struggles over the years to develop a relationship with him. When, after 30 years of teaching, the music program at his school was canceled, and he wonders what, if anything, he has really accomplished in this life. Friends and students, past and present, show him just what he has meant to them. We're talking about Mr. Holland's Opus today, folks.
Beautiful.
Yeah, my best stage performance voice that's stuffed up and everything else. I don't know how fast we want to jump into our questions and stuff for this, but it was one that Ashby and I were really excited about. Eric was in band, and I had to question if Eric was actually in band because I couldn't remember, honestly. You've always been a singer, and so I was like, well, have I missed this where he was in chorus somehow?
All district baritone. Thank you very much.
Well, somehow he missed seeing Mr. Holland's Opus.
Somehow.
I feel like we at least watched it two
Here's the thing.
years.
Probably, you know what? I probably did watch it, and I didn't remember it. I mean, honestly. I mean,
That's okay. Don't take offense to it.
I mean,
That's fair.
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, rewatching the movie today, I remembered the last scene when the last scene came on. I didn't remember anything else about the movie.
Gotcha.
So I know I've seen at least the last scene before. Maybe that was the day Mr. Jackson was out, and we just watched the last 20 minutes of the movie. I don't know.
That could be.
I mean, who knows? Maybe I saw all of it, and I just don't remember it.
We'll jump into this first part, and this will help maybe explain the same thing you're saying, because whenever I was thinking about it, I realized something as well. It says, what part of the movie did you like as a child versus what hits differently now as an adult? And I was trying to think through it at work today and trying to remember. I remember being in the class and do remember like it getting wheeled in and being like, we're going to watch a movie today. But I was a teenager at that point. I was just becoming a teenager. I realized that girls existed at that point. Rock and roll was like the big thing for me. So honestly, I probably just sat around and like tried to be cool throughout the class and didn't necessarily watch the entire movie. With Chris sitting next to me, we probably just joked around, did whatever else. You didn't have cell phones to play in during the time. But I feel like there are at least big moments that I do remember enough that it had an impact where I wanted to still watch it later. But thinking back, I would like to say that I was the kid that was just so in love with music that I was enthralled with the movie and I just had to watch it every second and yell at people to hush so I could see. But there's part of me thinking in realistic and honesty, I don't know that I did that in middle school.
Right.
How about you, Ashby?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in the same boat. I had a vague recollection of watching it as a kid in school. And if you had asked me before I rewatched it what it was about, I would have said it's about a band teacher who uses rock and roll to teach his kids about classical music and has a deaf son who he writes a symphony for.
Yeah.
So I was clearly misinterpreting parts of it in my memory. And
Wait, that's
it was
not what
very
it was
clear
about?
what I was taking away from it as a kid. Like the scene where he compares all of the modern, some of the modern rock songs to classical music. That particular thing stuck with me. Like I remember him playing the piano and saying, "What is this?" And they'll name off a rock song, and he'll say, "Actually, it's Bach or whatever."
Mm-hmm.
And then he'll play, a concerto, and they're like, "Oh, that sounds similar." And so he reels them into caring about what he's teaching them by meeting them where they're at. And so, of course, that stood out to me as a kid because it also involved rock and roll
Mm-hmm.
music. Um, and then in my mind, I had skipped a lot of the parts that were very adult, of course, because I was watching it as a kid. And so I completely missed the fact that he is trying to accomplish something as an adult and he's missing the mark because he never has time. And so in my brain, I remembered that he ended up writing a musical piece for his deaf son. So I confused the very end of the movie with one of the sort of primary climaxes, which is where he sings the John Lennon song to his son.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of melded those two moments together in my memory. And then of course there are all of these ancillary things that are going on that I completely forgot about because as a kid, like my brain wasn't focused on remembering that because I couldn't identify with it. So, I remembered the hilarious driver's ed scene, which is so
Mm-hmm.
funny. Um, but so then sitting down this week and saying, okay, let me rewatch this movie that has sort of stuck with me from childhood, totally different. Like totally different things popped out to me watching it as an adult because now instead of identifying with his students, I'm identifying with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the idea that life's accomplishments are not about things that we do, but about like people we interact with,
Mm-hmm.
um, was totally lost on me the first time I watched it. And then also the idea that they talk about really early on where he says when I was in high school, I wanted to be anywhere else and it never occurred to me that maybe my teachers did too.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea that like, you know, teaching is a worthy profession and a calling, but teachers are humans too. Adults are humans too. And some days they don't want to be there any more than you do, you know? Um, and that never occurred to me as a student, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there are really adult themes in this movie that just completely go over your head as a kid.
And I'll agree to that. And also the part that stood out to me too, in that same vein, is I mentioned Mr. Jackson earlier. For those out there that don't know, he probably doesn't mean a thing to you, but you probably at least have some sort of teacher that you've had in your lifetime, maybe not music, but some other way that has meant a lot to you, or did something that changed your life in some sort of way, and you may not have realized it in the moment. It was a much later thing. Um, and for me, I feel like that came across a lot more. I thought back and appreciated him even more. Because he really cared about what he did in the same way that Mr. Holland very much cared about music. And, you don't get that vibe from Mr. Holland at the beginning. He very much comes off as a jerk, who's selfish and very caught up in himself. At least that's how I took it. To me, it reminded me almost how Michael Scott in the first season of The Office, where you're like, hey, I really want you to like this, but skip this guy in the beginning. I was watching it the other night, and Eric, didn't remember seeing it, and his text said, I was like, Eric, don't give up on him yet, because in the beginning, there's a lot of it that Eric being a teacher, I can see how he just comes in and just doesn't appreciate the job or anything else. It's just something to make him some money while he's doing something else. I can see how that can be a real turnoff, and this is me speaking completely outside of any conversation with Eric. It was just, I'm telling you how much I love, want you to see this movie. And literally the first half hour, this guy's talking about, doing a profession that you do and making like a crap out of it. So
like his literal first statement to the principal was like, I'm trying to think of how he worded it. It was like, he got a teaching degree certificate as a fallback job,
Yep.
never thinking that he would actually have to fall back on that job.
Mm-hmm.
And Like, so yeah, I get that. Like,
Yeah.
that wasn't his first choice. It wasn't his passion. So
That's all I could think about. Was
Yeah,
just
and the
like,
principal's like, well, I don't really see teaching as a fallback, Mr. Holland.
mm-hmm.
and then she was also like, and I don't really get along with people who do see it that way. Like, I like that she gave it right back to him. It's like,
Yeah.
So how about you, Eric?
so, like, as I mentioned earlier, I don't remember watching much of this as a kid. I do remember, like, maybe if it wasn't in band, maybe like my mom and dad had rented it, like at Blockbuster or whatever. And it was on in the living room, and like as a kid, I would just, not interested. I'm sorry, but there are a lot of things that just stuck out to this movie, and a lot of those things we'll talk about when we get to, I think, our third question about what working the best and the themes in the movie. But a few things that just really, I guess, gripped me. First of all, before I watched it today during our asynchronous learning day. So while I'm answering emails and sending out feedback or whatever, I've got this on in the background. But before that, I saw our social media post that we put out yesterday. And I was blown away by the amount of responses we got. And I can't wait to get to all those responses at the end of the podcast. But a lot of them brought up our band teacher from middle school and high school, Mr. Robert Jackson. So that kind of presented a new, like, I guess, way of looking at this movie, kind of looking at it through the eyes of Bob Jackson, first and foremost, because he was and still is one of the top 2 or 3 influences in my love of music to this day. Because I did band in middle school. I was a terrible trumpet player. We had 13 trumpet players. I was 10th chair, and then I was 11th chair. I couldn't even break the top 10. Even today, like, you put a trumpet in front of me, and I know the finger positions, but I still cannot make a noise that sounds anything like a trumpet, sustaining any kind of, like, normalcy. And he saw me, and he saw how hard I was trying, and he said, hey, why don't you switch to this instrument? And he showed me a euphonium or a baritone. And he said, unlike the trumpet where, you would eventually want to buy your own trumpet, which I had already bought a trumpet. He's like, all you got to do is buy a $40 mouthpiece for this because I've got one here at the school that you can use. So I bought a $40 mouthpiece, and that mouthpiece, that was my instrument. I would take the baritone home on weekends to practice, but that $40 mouthpiece was mine. So, and through that, I was a very good baritone player because the mouthpiece was a little bigger. It made a different sound. And my role in the band was different than, like, the trumpet sounds, they have a different role. The baritones kind of lean in with the trombones a little bit, but they also have their own little thing. And I didn't realize this at the time. And I was realizing it as I was reflecting. But all the set music we had, like, you mentioned The Tempest in, I think, either one of our social media posts or whatever, and I posted it today. There wasn't a baritone part. He wrote out a baritone part for me and John Childers to play.
That's awesome.
And because I kept thinking, why is my music just so, like, raggedy? Like, it's not, like, clean and professional. It hit me today that
that's awesome.
He actually wrote out my part, so I would have a part that would go, and I don't know if it was a combination of different parts or if he was just hearing it and writing it, but that's what he did for me. So I would have an expanded part in the band, was write out an instrument
amazing.
part. I mean, and there was some piece of music that actually had a baritone part, but those are the things he did for me. And just that little piece of information right there, the amount of work he put into it, I saw that here while watching that movie, where I don't know Bob Jackson's ultimate role, like, in life, but I do know he was passionate about music, and I know he was passionate about teaching, and I know that wasn't Mr. Holland's, that wasn't his prerogative at the very beginning of the movie, but seeing the end result of all these people who were so appreciative of him, including, was it the governor, senator?
Governor.
Governor, thank you, the governor. I mean, just seeing what he did for them, and it made me see what Bob Jackson did for us. That's the thing I took away from this movie, was his role was more than just teaching us notes on a scale. It was more than teaching us a love of music, but it was just showing us that with a little bit of work, a little bit of push, and a lot of determination and passion, you can accomplish anything. And I haven't played a baritone. I played it one time, like Melissa Savigny, who's the current middle school band teacher. She had it at her house, like at after a Christmas parade, and so I got it and I played a few things. But before that, I hadn't played it since ninth grade. It's been 21 years since I played a baritone, and so clearly a baritone wasn't in my future, no matter how good I was at it. But the things I remember about that wasn't just the fact that I enjoyed playing baritone, but I enjoyed playing music for him. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed learning from him, so much to the point where when he left in the middle of my freshman year. I finished out the year, and nothing against Frank Jones, who replaced him. I'm sure Frank, also was passionate about music, but I had no interest in doing band without Robert Jackson. Mm-hmm. And
yeah, same.
And he came to our spring concert, and I told him how much I enjoyed playing with him. That was the last time I've ever spoke with him. Mm-hmm. And I was reflecting on that conversation today. But the things I take away from the things I learned from him in those 3.5 years I had him has nothing to do with the baritone and everything to do with the passion that I got from what he was teaching. So that's what I took away from this movie, was just me reflecting on my experiences in band. So
I feel very similar with that, because I know I did the same thing. I was in the 8th grade whenever he left in the middle of the year, and I finished out 8th grade doing it, but I had intentions of going to like a camp and doing all this stuff in high school, and I dropped out of band. Part of it, not just because of the teacher per se, you have sports or whatever else you get involved in. But I don't know. I feel like watching it now, it is much more, especially this time, because I made a note whenever I was looking at it this time. I own this on DVD, so I know I've seen it within the last year or two or so. But I feel like this is the first time watching it, and I've since probably, I don't even know when, without like picking up my phone during the middle of it. Like I made a purpose to really watch it. And all I could think about was Mr. Jackson. And I feel like that's where it hit so much to me. And I feel like that doesn't limit you out there if you don't know who Mr. Jackson is. I feel like if you watch this movie, there's someone in your life, teacher or not, that's had a role like this in your life, that can do the same for you, the same way we think of Mr. Jackson. I think for us, Mr. Jackson had a very thick mustache and everything else. And so seeing, your main character here, with a mustache and everything else, it's very easy to coordinate going back and forth about just putting him and envisioning him in this role. Anything else before we jump into our favorite scenes / quotes?
I mean, I'll say this too, and like this is something that just hit me. I probably would have done band all 4 years had he stayed at North Johnston High School.
Sure.
But I probably would not have gotten – I mean, I enjoyed sports growing up. I loved sports. I played sports. Probably would not have gotten as into sports had he stayed too. So, like, in a weird way, like, him leaving actually put me on my path to being a PE teacher. Because I wouldn't have taken – like, I took PEPI, which was a class that juniors and seniors could take, physical education pupil instructor. I took it 3 times. I took it once my junior year and twice my senior year, like both semesters my senior year. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was in band because band was last block.
Sure.
So, like, literally – I think he actually had a bigger role in my life than I thought, because had he been there, my life would have been a lot different, because I may would have stuck with music. I might would have gotten music scholarships. There's no telling what I would have done. But I'm thankful for what I'm doing. And a lot of the things that, I saw passion in him, I'm hoping I'm taking with me in the classroom as well, and hoping kids are as passionate or see my passion for the subject area I teach as well. Mm-hmm. So I'll talk about a little more about the relationship between music and physical education teachers when we get to the themes and stuff. But yeah, that's all I've got.
Well, not even to keep chiming on and on, but what you said made me think about something for me too. And I'm sure it's the same way with all of us, but because I did know, like, I started playing guitar on the side in middle school as wanting to learn how to play, because you listen to rock music and listen to whatever else. I didn't ever learn how to read that, to read music and play guitar. But playing saxophone in middle school, I knew how to do that. But whenever I got to high school and I no longer was playing in a band, the saxophone sat in my closet and just collected dust. And the time came where I was taking guitar a lot more seriously, and or a lot more serious. And then an opportunity came where I needed to buy a bigger amplifier so I can actually do something and go play shows and everything else. And I ended up trading my saxophone for my first half stack to actually play. And I used that for a long time, going and playing shows and joining bands and doing other things. So it's one of those things, though, if I never had started or been in band in middle school because of him, and honestly, if I'd continued to do it, who knows if I would have continued guitar or been more passionate about saxophone. But the same way. Like,
and then who knows if me and you would have been brought together to do music together 6 years ago.
That's true.
And then who knows if this podcast would even exist. Robert Jackson is responsible for the What the What podcast. Did you know that, Ashby?
Honestly.
The butterfly effect. Him leaving for Fuquay-Varina High School in the spring of 2001 set off a chain series of emotions and events that ultimately led to the creation of this podcast.
We have to throw that in at every episode now. Special thanks to
Robert Jackson.
Yes. And Ricky
That's
Lyles.
right.
We'll have to.
That's right.
I don't know if anyone still if you're listening to this podcast, maybe even for the first time because you saw the subject matter. If you have contact information for Robert Jackson,
He commented today.
did he really?
He commented on the post today.
Really, we need to make sure he get
Yeah.
I found him on Facebook and added him and tagged him.
Okay, we need to make sure he gets this just so he can hear about the profound effect he's had on our lives. So, anyhow, next question: favorite scenes or quotes. I'm gonna let y'all lead this
Ashby, I'll let
discussion.
you go. I feel like Eric and I are staring at each other and we just keep talking. So, Ashby,
To be
you
fair,
start.
I'm staring at Ashby too, even if she's not staring at me.
That's
so
true.
that sounded creepy. Never mind. Let me take that back.
I can see you. I can see you in the corner. It's I'm watching. I'm watching. Best believe if I had something to say, I would break in. I just really enjoyed listening to you guys, talk about
Oh,
middle school band because I'm right there with you.
Mhm.
hey, before we
He left my 8th grade year, and I might have considered high school band if not for that, but I gave it up after middle school for the exact same reasons
right
and started sports.
before the end of the podcast, we need to have if you remember any specific pieces of music we played while he was there, we can list that at the end as our favorite. I know we mentioned one earlier, but there's a few that I remember us playing.
Oh yeah, me too. Me too.
But
There's a few.
we can bring those up at the end, kind of as our miscellaneous. So, Ashby, favorite scenes, quotes, etc.
So I tried to stick to some of the. I did some funny and some serious quotes, and there were a few as I was watching that stood out to me. And I was like Kyle, I tried really, really hard to watch this movie, and not do anything else while I was watching it, which is really hard because, as you guys know, I texted you and I was like, I don't remember this being over 2 hours long. But so some of my favorite quotes were the one at the beginning where he goes, "When am I supposed to be advising them?" Talking about the students. And I thought it was hilarious because my immediate thought was, so teachers have always had too much on their plate and too little time.
It's hilarious because whenever I had the exact same thought whenever he so when am I supposed to be doing this? And they're like, you set it up with the students or whatever, thinking. And then he started talking about his free time, and the PE teacher was like, I've been doing this for this many years and I don't think I've ever had time that was free.
Right. Yeah. He's like, what's so funny? And he goes, the free time.
I don't think that exists. So.
And then I also thought the teachers don't wait was funny when they cut in front of the kids in the cafeteria.
Not a democracy. We don't wait. And here's the funny thing. I do that too. whenever we would have classes and eating in the cafeteria, if I didn't have lunch, I would go through the cafeteria line. I'd grab, if we had a burger that day or some chicken tenders or whatever. And here's the thing, if there'd be a class line, I'd grab my plate, I'd go round, I'd cut between two kids who were all too happy to let Coach preach in front of them, by the way. And then I'd go back to the front of the cashier and just cut in front of a kid there. And because here's the thing, those kids, they ain't got a class to teach in 15 minutes. So, I got to eat my food quick and go. So, but yeah, I thought that was hilarious seeing that. And I was like, oh, I do that.
Yeah. And then I also like the Mrs. Jacobs, you tell them I'm teaching music and that I will use anything from Beethoven to Billie Holiday to rock and roll if I think it will help me teach a student to love music. And she's like, well, I think that sounds like a perfectly acceptable answer.
Yeah.
Um, so I really like that quote because I really like how pretty pretty quickly, and I know that, years and decades were moving along as the movie paced. But I like that he went from, I don't want to be here to I'm going to do whatever it takes to reach these kids.
Yeah.
And I thought that that was sort of the first scene that we got to really see him stand up for the kids and for his profession and for his teaching method. And so I really, really liked that quote. And then also there were a lot of things happening in his marriage that obviously as a kid I was not understanding the tones or the themes or the metaphors of. Um, and there was a lot of things I missed about the diagnosis of their son and the treatment. I remember the scene even as a kid standing out to me where she starts realizing something's wrong because everyone's covering their ears and he's asleep. Um, but it wasn't until they went to that specialist, and I don't even remember that scene. And he says, don't gesture to him, don't sign to him because he'll never learn how to read lips. And we know now that that is not how you treat deaf children or deaf people. And they're fighting in the kitchen because he's yelling because he's trying to ask her for something and she doesn't understand. And then Mr. Holland's getting upset at the whole situation. And he says, he's a specialist, and he says, well, we shouldn't use gestures. And she says, he's a specialist that thinks that deaf people are retarded. And I realized that that's exactly what was happening, is that they were telling them that your son is less than, or your son is not going to be as bright as other children or as successful as other children, and that you have to treat him differently. um, and it must be so hard as a parent to feel like you're being told by someone who is an authority figure to do something with your own child that you then feel isn't right. And that's when she starts trying to find special schools for him. And so that scene really, really stuck out to me because it really didn't hit me the first time when I watched it like it did now because I'm older. What they must have been struggling with, especially in that day and age, to try to find what they thought was the right solution and the best solution for Cole. And I just thought that was really interesting.
I have some thoughts on that scene too. I was gonna maybe save them for our third question, but we can get into that discussion now if y'all want to, or we can hold back. So, like, the idea of, hang on, give me a second, Kyle. If you want to talk here, let me get myself together for a second.
Okay, we'll jump real quick and then we'll come back to Eric on that. One that's is a favorite quote and a scene that made it stood out is the one with Gertrude Lang. She's this clarinet player that is super passionate, loves music, wants to do this, and wants to be good at it. Spends all of her time practicing till like her lips are bleeding pretty much and blue in the face, and she's just isn't great at it. But he takes the time outside of it. And at first, like, there's the first part where he singles her out and embarrasses her a little bit, and there's part of me that's like, man, that would suck so much. But then there's the next part that's redeeming where he's like, no, okay, well, you really want to do this. He shows multiple times where he really stops, spends time with her, and tries his best to help her with that. And then the scene or the quote from that where he says, let me ask you a question. When you look in the mirror, what do you like about yourself? And she replies, my hair. He says, why? She says, well, my father always says it reminds him of the sunset. And he looks at her and says, play the sunset. Close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4. It hit me so hard when he said that. I was like laying on the couch. Tears came to my face too. It's like, it's so just such a magical moment where he looks at her and says, look at that most beautiful thing. Stop worrying about if you can do this or good or do it well and how you sound or if you're just, being a perfectionist. Just close your eyes and let it go and just let it flow out of you. And it can be so much more deeper than that. But to me, that really stood out. And then my other one that I will say is the scene about John Lennon's death. It really stood out to me. I remember working, my first job was working at a watch store, and I worked with these two ladies that grew up pretty much during this time period, and they both talked about the day that John Lennon died, how it, the whole world was rocked, everything was just upside down for them. But this scene hit home for me because, being music or whatever else, he comes home. It's being a big ordeal where it's, he's never met John Lennon, we assume, but it's something that his work has such an impact on his life that his death, struck him to a point that when he goes home, he's just so distraught. It does start, a bad, an argument with his son Cole over this, which honestly leads to so much better things. They finally have an all-out conversation. But something that really hit me, though, is when he walks in, his wife comes running up to him and says, "Did you hear? Are you okay?" Because you can tell it hurt her just as much, too. She's emotional about this loss. And the reason, I picked this is because this reminds me of a few years ago when Robin Williams died. I remember being at work. I remember seeing it and saying, "There's no way. There's no way this is true." Because, we went through fades on social media, not fades, pads where all of a sudden you would see it pop up a news article, somebody was dead. Half the time it was always fake. And so I wanted to believe that was fake, that he didn't commit suicide, that there's no way. And then I kept looking, and Robin Williams has been my favorite actor since childhood. Just he reminded me a lot of myself with humor and also depression and other stuff. But I remember that. I remember coming home that night just feeling completely distraught and not knowing what to do. And Erica looking at me and saying, "Are you okay?" and coming and holding me. And I remember that night literally just laying there on the couch watching Robin Williams movies because I didn't know what to do in a world now that did not have Robin Williams in it. And I know that's just getting all personal into my life or whatever, but it's just whenever that John Lennon scene hits, I know that feeling and I feel that feeling. And it's so heavy that you have a connection with someone that you've never met in your life, but their work has a big impact on your life. And so that one was another one just hit really heavy for me.
And I get that. I understand that. And it's a similar situation with me and Kobe Bryant, who was never my favorite basketball player, who I actually kind of rooted against him most of his career. But I recognized his talent. I mean, we had a world where he was one of the best athletes there was. And he was, retired. He'd been retired for a few years, and he was starting to, kind of give back, in his role. And then he passed away a year ago. And I remember reading the news, and if it wasn't for the fact that I had a bunch of people coming over to watch the Royal Rumble that night, and the fact that I was, talking to someone, brand new, that was, I probably would have broken down that night. Because it wasn't just him, it was his daughter. And, the thing I kept seeing was the impact he had as a father. And so, again, someone you've never met, and it rocks your world. So, I can see that parallel in the movie with John Lennon as well. And I'm sure, I'm sure we all have, the celebrities that are people that have really just kind of put their mark on our lives. And if they were to no longer be here, then we would feel a little lost without it. So I get it from that standpoint. My favorite scene, I think I mentioned it, because it's the one I remember most vividly, is the last scene where he's cleaning out his desk. They're throwing him a surprise. They're playing the American Symphony by Glenn Holland, and he's directing. And it hits me because this is the end of his teaching career. He might hang a shingle and, teach some piano, but this is it. And I'm in the middle of my 12th year this year. And literally I asked a coworker the other day, how many years has it been? Because the coworker's been with me for my entire career, and I actually had to count on my fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm over a third of the way there. If I teach for 30 years, I'm almost halfway there. I'll be halfway there in a couple of years. And watching that scene, as a teacher, you understand that the subject matter is important, but the relationships, the way you make kids feel, can trump that in so many different ways. because you understand that some kids maybe they don't come from a home where they get a hug every day. They don't come from a home where they get a warm meal. They don't come from a home where they get any kind of compliments or encouragement or love, where they have never been told that they were good at something, where they do not feel like they belong on this earth, where they do not feel like they're good enough to do anything worthwhile. And you hope as a teacher, you know you're not going to reach every one of them. Like, just the odds are against that. You hope you do, but you are not. You hope that you can reach as many of them as you can. And watching that final scene, it gives me a glimpse of what I hope I get to see in 18 years. I hope I get to see students I've taught who may have come from the worst of situations, or maybe they came from the best of situations, whatever. And you hope that they've made an impact on the world, a positive impact, and you hope that you played a tiny part in that. And that's my hope as a teacher. I don't really care if they can run the mile in 8 minutes. That doesn't matter to me. I mean, if they can, fantastic. That's great. You're in shape. Okay. Mm-hmm. I hope that they are better people because of their interactions with me. And seeing the impact that Mr. Holland had on all these people, I want that in 18 years. I want to know that I also made a difference. And I'm seeing some of it now. I mean, one of the first guys I ever taught was in D.C. last week as a National Guard member, protecting the inauguration. Like, he was a fifth grader my first year teaching, and he's up there doing that. He's a fireman now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Another kid that I coached my first year, he in 8th grade, he student taught with me last year or 2 years ago. Or no, last year. Yeah. He student taught with me 2 years ago and is teaching. He's now teaching at North Johnston Middle. Mm-hmm. To see little things like that where I'm starting to see kids who I taught who are now out of high school and now getting out of college. I'm getting to see the beginnings of what their lives are looking like. Mm-hmm. It's a fulfilling role. It is for all the crap that teachers get, and we get so much. The reward we get when we see what our students go on to accomplish, it's greater than any monetary reward we can get. Now, don't get me wrong, that's not an excuse for you not to pay me, but that's not why we do it in the first place. So watching that final scene, it's my favorite scene because it's I hope to make it 30 years in teaching, and I hope that I have just an ounce of that.
I hope in 30 years, like, we're not, 15, 18, whatever you're at from now, you're packing up, getting ready to leave, and you come out into the gym, and there's just hundreds of people there, all standing around, all ages. And then there's this giant game of dodgeball. They're like, Coach Creech, forget the school system, and they say we can't play dodgeball anymore. You're in the middle. And it's hundreds of people throwing dodgeballs at you.
Yes.
But that's the part of me that, like, I felt like watching this movie, I thought a lot more about you watching, especially towards the end of this movie. The more I got to it, because I know, like, I've never been a teacher, but being friends with you, I've seen a lot of the frustrations that happen growing up. My mom's always been in the school system. I see all the frustrations of things that a lot of people just are oblivious to or ignore or whatever else. But I couldn't help but think of you, like, being an older man at some point and walking out someday, because I get to see it now. Like, to you, it's just a normal thing half the time. But, especially pre-COVID, anytime we were to go outside anywhere, some kid would come ring up, Coach Creech. Hey, Coach Creech. No matter if you're at the movies, the grocery store, we could be in Raleigh at the mall, and all of a sudden there's some random kid, Coach Creech. Halftime they're a little nervous because they see you outside of school and they don't know how to react to that.
They don't know that I don't live at the school.
Yes.
That's because teachers don't exist outside of school, Kyle.
Yes, for sure.
No, we don't.
But I see that, like, and the cool thing is, like, of course you see current students, you see younger little kids, but it's cooler to see some of the older ones that kind of like, you can tell they're doing whatever they're doing, but they see you and they kind of like straighten up a little bit, and they don't do it out of fear, they do it out of like almost a respect they have for you, and then to stop and say hello to you or whatever else, and I've seen that like multiple times as well, so I am excited for you, and you are changing lives.
And here's the really cool thing. Like, this is something that I just thought of here. Now, when you move, I don't know what school district your house will be in. I'm hoping it's the micro school district.
Pine Level.
Well, we'll have to change that. But 18 years from now will be my 30th year of teaching. It'll also be your daughter graduating high school.
Maybe.
You know, I mean, that's
how school years
yeah.
start.
I mean, that's how the math kind of works around that time. So when she's graduating, I should be retiring. That's just kind of a cool thought to have.
There's time. I mean, you can move to Pine Level.
I'm not moving the Pine Level.
You never know. You never say never.
I feel like Roman Pierce in Too Fast, Too Furious. I'm not going back to Barstow. so let's move on to question 3, and then we can get back on the point I was going to make earlier with what Ashby was talking about. This, if I can get my iPad to open up. So question 3 is, what worked the best? What themes in the movie remained unchanged from decade to decade as the movie progressed and arguably remain relevant today? So I want to jump back in on Ashby's conversation that she had about deaf, his son being deaf, and the outlook that the doctors or the specialist had, and just the reaction that his wife had and he had, and just not knowing how to, I guess, to deal with the fact that his son was differently abled. Now, I use the term differently abled, and not like disabled, because he is very much able to do everything normally. Okay, he may not be able to hear, so he's differently abled. And you know, we have a friend who is differently abled as well. I have friends who have children who have autism, or who have other kind of special needs, and seeing the reactions from Cole's parents, from Glenn and his wife, and it's almost like a heartbreak. Like, you know, and I see his wife, you know, make the comment, you know, he's never gonna be able to hear my voice. I'm never gonna be able to really speak to him, you know, to let him know that I'm here, you know, like, just to see the stress and the turmoil that's kind of like just pouring out in emotion. And it really broke me watching that, because I'm not a parent, okay, and I hope to be a parent one day. But I have friends who are parents or will become parents, and I've seen a similar scene play out with another friend of mine, where their child was diagnosed with autism, and like they didn't know how to feel about it. Like they were conflicted. That, you know, there was a lot of running emotions. Like, did we do something wrong? You know. And I don't know what that's like, so I can't speak to that. But I can speak to the fact that, just like in this movie, you know, the child is still a beautiful child, is still got value, has got worth, is, you know, just so many things. And it's unfortunate the specialist, as Ashby had brought up, did not see that, thought that he was less than. And I think that's an indictment on society in general. We're kind of almost trained at this point to look at those children who were differently abled, whether it be someone who's deaf, someone who's blind, someone who has autism, Down syndrome, sickle cell, whatever. I mean, and we're trained to, they're different, you know, they're not as good, they can't contribute as much. And it breaks my heart. As someone who teaches these kids on a weekly basis, it breaks my heart to think that anyone would ever look at a child like that and say they cannot contribute to our society. Mm-hmm. They cannot do what we can do because they were born differently abled. And it's a bunch of crap. Okay? It is just it is just, it's awful to me to think that that's an attitude, but it's not just an attitude. It's an attitude that's taught. It's an attitude that is kind of ingrained in us from a young age, where, when we see something we don't understand, we're taught to fear it. We fear what we don't understand. So if we see a kid acting differently or that is different than we are, we're automatically taught to fear it. We don't understand it. We're scared of it. And I saw that and it broke my heart. It reminded me of there's a song called I Ain't Got an Answer. It's by a spoken word artist, Propaganda. And there was a guest lyricist on the second verse called Sho Baraka. And I'm going to just read it, and I think it kind of speaks to what maybe the parents may have been, what the Hollands were feeling like in this movie. Sho Baraka says, "It's apparent sometimes I think I failed as a parent. My son having autism is rough, but maybe he don't speak because words don't say much. Maybe he doesn't need words to communicate his love. Sometimes the silence causes me to stumble. It's possible he's a version of me that's more humble. And I think my child finds more joy in playing with my phone than playing on his own. Will he shed a tear when I'm gone? I'm wrestling with the shame of an outsider's view of me. His life is a spotlight on my own insecurities. But I know his laugh. It lights up 1,000 rooms. And when he speaks to me, it's just like a flower blooms. This has just become my own visual diary. I'm at the doctor's office just hoping that they would lie to me, that my son would be all right. But if he's not, my son would be all right because he is God's." And
Wow.
like that lyric really stuck out to me when I was watching that scene where, you get that news and you're thinking, I hope that this is just a nightmare, because you don't know how to, you want your child to be healthy and everything, and then you get news that there's something that's off, and you see the reaction there, and you're hoping it's just something different. And I don't, like I said, it's hard for me to speak to because I'm not a parent in that situation, and I'm not a parent at all. But I want people, I want people to just understand that when you have kids like this, they have value. There's so much they have to offer than just what we think they have to offer. So,
Well, I feel like, too, this being a movie that came out in 1995, it still handled the situation. It brought it to light in a situation where you may not have in some other times, especially in the mid-90s like that. I think of Jay Pittman because he was my age, and him and his sister, both of his parents were deaf.
yes,
And he was, him and his sister were not. And I had so many questions. I was, and I asked him all the time. I was like, I'm not trying to get on your nerves, but how do they know when the phone rings or somebody's at the door or what? And he just explained it to me so much where it's been his life the entire time, and to realize I wasn't necessarily looking down on him. I was just trying to figure out how does life work that way. And being a person that has a daughter on the way, I would honestly act very much like the Hollands did in this, where I don't know what to do, and we have the internet now and different ways of trying to find out of things. But you would go to a specialist and hope that they would give you the best guidance. And whenever they say something, you would take it as their word as, well, this is what they're telling us to do and everything else. And even Mr. Holland, I get that side of it where you get frustrated. I do, at least, where it's like, he's your son. Spend time with him. Put in the effort. I know you're tired. I know you're doing all these other things. Put in the effort. But I know, something that's not really even so much mentioned in this movie, but to know how much music means to him, and then to see he's never going to get to be able to share that with his son, at least in the way he hoped to. We do see them cross a bridge with that later, and him being able to figure out ways to share music with his son. But me, just even knowing I have a daughter on the way, that's one of the things I'm already excited about. Is there's, to know that there's going to be a human being in this world that it's up to me to teach them things, and I get to show them songs that mean a lot to me and they'll never have heard it ever before. And there's so many songs I'm excited to show my daughter someday. And if it came out where she was deaf and not be able to hear it, there's part of you that would, really break down inside because you had these hopes. But at the same time, it doesn't mean she's worthless or anything else. It just means, okay, well, there's tons of other ways that she's going to be able to do a lot of other cool things. You got to figure it out. I'm glad they had that moment where Miss Holland just literally breaks down in the kitchen and screams and says, "Listen here, this is what I'm going through. I want to be able to communicate with my son. I want to, sometimes it takes big moments like that for us to actually open up and say, okay, I've been ignoring this problem, or I've been putting this problem off the side and not addressing it or not trying to do anything with this problem. I've just been ignoring it and not giving any effort." So I don't know. That whole scene just hit me big whenever it happened.
Absolutely. Ashby, do you have anything else you want to add? I know you originally started the conversation. Do you have anything you want to add to that before I bring up some other things?
I had a few other things to talk about just in the themes from decade to decade, or
Okay.
what worked best in the movie.
Yes,
And
I do too. So.
Me too. So we can
I
go ahead.
really love the cultural touchstones, like the montages as the decades changed in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really nice to see what the school and the students and teachers and families would have been dealing with in the wider world while life in this town and at this school kind of moved forward, because you don't teach and you don't parent in a vacuum. And so it was really interesting to see as, the 60s became the 70s, became the 80s, became the 90s, what was happening culturally in the world that was affecting what was happening in the movie. And it it was it was helpful too, because there were some scenes in the movie that you would have had to understand what was happening at the time to really grasp. And one of the ones that hit me the most was, Vietnam. And
Mm-hmm.
so, he moves out of his first year teaching, and these kids that he's now grown to love and appreciate, a lot of them are now going away to war, and many of them are not coming back. And so, one of my other favorite quotes, um, was for the burial service of Lewis Russ, where Glenn says he turns to the coach and says, "You all right?" And he says, "Yeah." And then he pauses and he says, "We know too many of these kids." And I just thought, you know, I think that it talks to the wider issues of teaching, where these kids are your kids, and when something large happens like a war culturally, it hits, I think, parents obviously, but what we don't think about are all the other people who spend the most time with these children who are now going away to war. um, and so I really appreciated the movie taking the time to deal with that. And then also, one of the other sort of cultural things that I think will never change is sort of the whole idea of like these kids these days with this music, and that is so generational, because when my grandmother was coming up, everyone was listening to classical and big band, and then Elvis came along, and Elvis moved his hips, and it was like the devil, and it was sinful, and
We
people were
cannot do
so
that.
into it, and then my mom comes along and she's listening to like rock and roll, and my grandmother's like, "That's too loud, that's trash, turn it off, that's the devil's music." And then my mom has me, and I come along and I'm like, "Rap, mom, hip hop, listen to this, it's the thing." And she's like, "That sounds awful." And so it doesn't matter that the decades change and generations grow up and beget new generations. There's always this theme of like, this music is the devil's music.
When it's funny because like even today's music, like when kids are listening to it now, it's like, what do you mean you want to listen to Billie Eilish? No, no, no. This right here is Queen. I'm playing on the radio here. Or
Exactly.
This is Usher, or this is Outkast. Who's Billie Eilish?
Right.
I mean, seriously, who's
Right.
Halsey? Is that how you say her name? Is it Halsey? I don't
Halsey.
know. Halsey. See, exactly. I mean, I am that parent without even having kids at this point. So, I mean,
I just
I
see you
remember
in
the
class
first
like,
time I ever listened to a Billie Eilish song, I was like, "What is this?"
I just see you like third graders. You using that Halsey Devil music, boy? Get over there and run some laps. I'll just like. I wrote this synopsis of what worked best. So I'm just gonna read it, and then we'll jump over to Eric and you guys jump back in. But I said I don't know if the writers, producers, directors, or the directors are musicians, but they really hit the nail on the head for me. And I guess you wouldn't have to be a musician per se, just someone who's passionate about something. But being a musician and playing in bands in my teens, through my 20s, and even now in my 30s, I always had hopes deep inside to be successful in music. But somewhere in the midst of that, life happens and you end up taking a job. And it's not a bad job, but you have to pay the bills, so you stay there a lot longer than you intended. And the next thing you know, that is your new life. And music is the thing you do on the side that you really don't take time for anymore. It's easy to feel like a failure, to feel like you let down that person you were before, to feel like you had dreams and you let them all slide away so that you could be comfortable instead. And it hurts, but there's something necessarily true. If you change the glass that you're looking through, you've played with some of the best musicians around. I've met my wife through music. I've been able to do a lot of great things because of the job that I currently have now that allows me to still be involved with things outside of work and including music. Coming up, whenever I'm about to be 34, but whenever I was 30 or hitting 30, and even in, I've been at my job like 10 and a half years now. I was only supposed to be at my job for 3 months. Like I took that job as I'm going to do this and go back to school, but I'm still playing music. I'm still going to make this work. And there's been many times I've had mental breakdowns and be like, I'm a failure. Like I would be so disappointed with myself if I was my high school person or early college person looking at me now and saying, if you were fast forwarding and hoping where you were going to end up and to see where I am. And there's part of that sure, there's parts that I've not given my best effort to do some of my best. But then there's the other parts that high school person or that early 20s person didn't know and appreciate about life yet either. So to see that on the other side of it, the same way Mr. Holland has his eyes open later where he comes to love teaching and loving these students, and it's no longer necessarily about writing music. I hope to write more music in my life, but it's no longer the thing that it doesn't make me or break me anymore. I'm thankful for the job I have. I'm thankful for the people I get to work with. And I'm thankful for the situations that it allows me to be able to afford to do other things now and to get out and be involved in different situations that mean something to me now that maybe probably didn't mean anything to me back then. I don't know. It really hit me hard because I know that feeling of, coming home and hating your job and saying you hate your job and just wishing you could go back to just playing music and that being your main thing and just going and playing shows all the time and not having to worry about paying your bills or doing this, that, or the other. And there's just that weird part of it where it's transitioning and you're growing and you become an adult. And I don't know, it's just, there's a lot of me I see within this movie and the emotions that he goes through with it to hit home for me.
And it's funny you mention, the idea of hating your job and, thinking you're a failure, because I've had those thoughts too, and like a few years into my teaching career, I thought, why am I doing this? And I think every teacher goes through that.
Sure.
And the unfortunate fact is a lot of the teachers who go through that do end up quitting because it is tough and the hours are tough and there's very little support financially from the community. You can say you support teachers all day long, but there's really not as much support for teachers from parents, from administration, from the community. There should be more, is what I'm trying to say. Now, I'm not saying that all administrators are like that, all parents are like that. I'm blessed to have every administrator I've worked for has had the goal of the kids being first, and I've been blessed in that aspect. But I do know there are administrators out there who are just trying to balance a budget, who are just trying to appease the bottom line. There are people on school boards who are not there to serve kids or teachers. They're there to serve the community who does not have the idea of a teacher being as important as they should be. And that's apparent even today in our county, and I'll say it. And I hope I don't lose my job. But so I've had those thoughts. And then I start when the pandemic hit last year and we were pulled out of schools. That kind of opened my eyes a little bit to how much I really enjoyed my job because I was missing it. And even though we've been back, in person, we went back in person at some point in the fall, it wasn't the same because I wasn't teaching in my actual gym. Monday, the day this podcast comes out, I'll be teaching in my gym. It'll be the first time I've taught in my gym in 11 months. And I'm so excited because that's where I'm home at. That's my forte. And so but I've had the thoughts of I just hating my job and stuff, but then it gets taken away from you and you understand the blessing behind it. We were, the Powerball and the Mega Millions lottery was a bunch of money last week. So me and a group of friends got in and bought some tickets, and we were talking about what we would do with it. And of course, everyone's first answer was I'm not going to work tomorrow. And my answer might have been a little different. I don't know if I'm going to quit my job. I might try to modify it a little. I might quit teaching full time and I might just come back and read to kids, or I might just be a volunteer coach, or whatever. But I don't think I'll ever get rid of teaching completely, even if I won $100 million, because there's value in that. So anyway, a couple of things I wanted to touch on with the themes or the, the things that kind of stuck out that are still relevant today. The idea that music and the arts are being underfunded and cut is something that is still taking place 25 years later. A few years ago, there was a House bill introduced in North Carolina. I don't remember. I should have did a better job researching it. That would have effectively could have cut art, music, and PE classes in elementary schools because they needed the teacher positions to fund more classroom teachers. And the principal telling Mr. Holland, if it's a choice between Bach and the Beatles versus long division and reading, I'm choosing long division every time. And I thought Mr. Holland's answer was perfect. You keep doing that, and they'll have nothing to read about because the arts don't exist anymore. As someone who works closely with the art and music teacher at our school, and as someone I'm one of the biggest advocates for the arts. It's wrong. The idea that the idea of a well-rounded student is more than just knowing how to read and do math and knowing science. The idea of those just being the most important things, and there are teachers out there who believe that too. I mean, I remember my very first year of teaching. I'm not going to say names here, but there was someone retiring. And it might have been my third year, second or third year teaching. But someone was retiring that year, and someone was giving a little speech about them, and they said something along the lines of, if they could, they wouldn't let them go to music or PE because that stuff wasn't important, but math was super important. They needed to be in math more and more. And I'm sitting out there listening to this, and I'm just like, people really think that. The idea that music isn't important, that PE and art, they're not important. And so watching that from a film in 1995, it's gotten worse and worse over the years where, I mean, we're very fortunate in Johnston County where we still have art, music, and PE in every elementary school in Johnston County. But that's not the case everywhere. There are some schools that don't have music programs. There are some schools that don't have art programs. And even that, when we were in high school, we actually had a drama class. I don't think that class exists anymore. We had photography.
It didn't exist by the time I came along. So
Yeah,
think about that.
exactly.
I was a year behind you in high school, and by the time I got to freshman year and you were a sophomore, that class was gone because I wanted to take it.
Yeah, I mean, we had photography when I was in high school at some point. That class is gone now.
Nope.
Yeah.
I would have taken that too.
Exactly. I mean, there's so many things, and that they started cutting them like that because of money issues. And so just the idea of the arts being underfunded, not funded, going away. That's still something that's very much at stake, even in 2021. If not, I mean, it's critically at stake. And I would urge you, if you're listening to this, please support the arts. Please support art, music, PE in your schools, because those are the things that, I mean, me and Kevin Savigny have worked together for 11 of my 12 years. When I saw this movie, I saw him in Mr. Holland because he's so passionate about music. I saw myself in the PE teacher, obviously. Mm-hmm. And, we joke around like, PE is what's going to get you to live a long life, and music's going to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, that's good.
Like, those are the things. Like, if you want to live a long life, you need PE to get there, and music's going to make it, make the journey that much more better. But he can even go into like studies about how music is good for your brain, art good for. I mean, just there's so many studies that show that continually show that the arts and music are positive things for your child's development and growth. And the fact that they're being underfunded and cut is a shame. So that's a relevant theme from this movie. Please support the arts. Go to your congressman and your school board members and make sure they know you want the arts supported in your school system. So,
absolutely.
Any nitpicks? Do we have any other?
You skipped.
Oh,
you skipped one. Did you have anything else before we get to our next question, Ashby?
Did I?
No, I'm good.
Our next question was, other than Mr. Holland, who is your favorite character?
Oh.
I mean, I think this can just be a really simple question. I added it because I feel like, the movie's called Mr. Holland's Opus, and I think we've already talked a lot about some of the other characters, but I just wanted to add a place for us to talk about one of my favorite characters, which is the principal.
Mm-hmm.
I think she's amazing. I love her sort of through line about reminding him that he's a compass. I really, really loved her coaching of him. She obviously wasn't enamored of him for really good reason at the beginning of the movie because he called teaching a fallback option. But I really love when she tries to explain to him, like, our job is not just to put knowledge in these kids' heads. Our job is to also make sure that we're giving them a direction to head in, to make sure that they take that knowledge out in the world and they do the best with it that they can. So I really liked her.
If I had to answer this question, and I guess I do because it's on our list, his wife.
Yeah.
I just really admire her, I mean, from the very beginning, she is supportive of him. Mm-hmm. Encouraging him to get up, you need to go do this. I mean, just like, just seeing them work together, and it's not always rosy and it's not always, rainbows and butterflies, but I just, the love is there, and, and it's evident through her interactions, with him and with their son. So I would go with Mrs. Holland.
Mrs. Holland has a name, and it's Iris. I had to look it up, but
from the Goo Goo Dolls?
No, not quite. Could be there.
Yes.
But I chose her as well. That's the reason I knew her name, because I had to write it down. Something we don't get a whole lot about her, about any of her history or past. I wrote down like on a different thing. I honestly would like a little bit of a prequel, just to see what their lives were like beforehand. Like, what was he doing, musically wise? What was he doing traveling? But we see our introduction to her in the beginning is she's selling photographs. Like, she's taken photography, like, which she is a photographer. She's done pictures. She talks about how she sold some, whatever amount of pictures that day. So she's also very much into the arts. It's not she just married into somebody that cared about music. She's very much into the arts with doing photography. She cared about John Lennon. Once again, I don't want to keep hounding on it to make it about me, but Erica reminds me a lot of her, my wife, because for a long time in our marriage and our relationship, I've been in bands, and I've been where there's multiple nights out of the week or weekends that you're not home, or you're coming in very late. And for the longest time, she's always been, forever, she's always been very supportive of me doing that, knowing there was something I was passionate about. She didn't complain about it. She would go off to the shows with us. I always tried my best to make sure to make time for her and spend time with her as well, because that's very important. But to know what that is and what that means, like to have somebody that does back what you're doing. You don't have to constantly explain or feel bad for going and doing these things you're passionate about, because they support you and want you to succeed as well. So it's just to see that, and to see the, I'm glad there's multiple times she finally like stood up to him a couple different times, because he just was being oblivious to things. But she was my favorite as well.
All right.
Cool.
Nitpicks?
Rowena.
Oh man. Me too. Don't
Okay.
get me started.
Go ahead and get
No,
started.
let's get started. That's the whole point of the section.
I do not remember this entire storyline as a middle schooler, which you would think maybe I would, because I mean, I know that you're entering that age where you're, like Kyle said, middle school is where you start to be like, oh, the opposite sex exists for some other reason than to just be completely gross,
Yep.
And I you would think that I would be watching this movie like, so she has a thing for her teacher, like what? But I don't remember, even in high school, like it wasn't until college that I remember looking at a teacher and thinking, huh, and maybe that was just me. I mean, I know that it happens, but and I'm not mad at this as sort of like a side story. I understand that in 40 years of teaching that there was bound to be a female student that was like, "Hey, Mr. Holland,
Sup, son?
sup," And honestly, to be honest, here's the thing. In that scene where he's saying goodbye to her at the bus, there is something about Richard Dreyfuss that is like this weird smoldering energy where I was like,
You're like, okay, I see it. I see it.
yeah. But I also was just kind of like, I don't know about this. Like, what I did like about it is that they sort of took it right there, and then I feel like where some other movies would have had him cross the line, he kept his integrity,
which is
like
awesome. Because
right, he did everything he could to encourage her and to protect her into this, decision she was choosing to make by going off into this big city. And he did not belittle her, and he did not, make light of her feelings, but he was like, you gotta go, if you, and I just really liked that. And I also liked that his wife's reaction was kind of like, okay, well, I'm not going to jump to any conclusions. This is, what's happening. And I don't know the full story. And, he comes home to her and he says, I love you. And she says, I know. There's trust in that relationship,
yes.
that he doesn't betray. And so, I liked where that storyline ended, but as it was happening, I was like,
It just
we
felt
could have just
really
cut this entire thing.
And that's one of the things I talked about before we went on the air was like, we could have cut this subplot. This could have made the movie 20 minutes shorter. I mean, just
Correct.
To me, like, there's a little bit deeper part, though, because I see it, because same way, I was watching it, and on the surface of it, if you're just, say if I had my phone out and I was just doing my Instagram and watching this, I'd be like, okay, why do we have to have this weird, awkward moment where he's going off with this young girl? Like, he could have skipped this whole entire thing. But then I looked at it on a deeper level. Well, maybe I did. I don't know. I feel like I did. Where this isn't a point where he's even necessarily attracted to a girl. He's going there, first off, to protect her and everything else. But when he refuses to go to New York with her, he has a moment right there in front of him where he can leave everything behind. He can, this job that he's hated dealing with for a long time now. This thing where he could, in that moment, he could have left his wife, his son, the issues that he's dealing with, trying to figure out about having a deaf child, all these things that he should be very much important to his life, though. But he has a moment to leave all of that behind and go back to the lifestyle that he used to live and loved. The point that he could just drop it all and go just be a musician full time. He could go back to New York, meet up back with his band buddies, and just do things like he used to do. And I say that because there's been plenty of times in my life I'm like, oh, I'm going to join the band or start the band back up. And it's like, in that moment, he doesn't even like halfway get on the bus. He's like, no, I'm at this point in my life now that I'm not going back. I'm moving forward. He goes home to his wife and to his son, and he loves them. He goes back to this job that he has hated for a long time and loves his students, loves his job, and wants to make a difference in their lives. So there's, like I said, that's digging a little bit into this scene, but there's a point where in that second, if he would have gotten on the bus with that girl or not without the girl and just gone off, he could have dove back into that lifestyle that he used wants to know and love that, we barely get a glimpse of as this movie's starting. But instead, he makes that decision. And you see that in his character throughout the rest of the movie, too, where he's very much involved in the teaching side of thing and the student thing. The one part that I did was that I had questions about with it, too, was, is the school year technically over at this point? I know it's like the senior play type thing. But where are this girl's parents? He's literally met this girl at a bus stop at midnight and said, go to New York, do amazing things.
Stay with my buddy, by the way.
And I looked at that.
Him and his wife are expecting you.
I looked at that as kind of at least like, okay, he's at least watching out for her to say, because if she doesn't, she's going to show up and live on the streets, or who knows what's going to get into. He at least says, go to these people. They will take care of you. And hopefully there's that split scene before he goes home to his wife that he's like, hey, your daughter's on a bus. Here's the name and the address of where she's going to arrive to. Call them. This is where your daughter is. But I don't know. That kind of threw me off a little bit.
Well,
I mean, on the other hand, you're assuming that she has parents that care.
Sure.
That's right. Well, she even mentioned when she was telling him, like, if I don't do this now, I'll be stuck in this town as a waitress or whatever.
True.
Like, she may feel like she has no future here because there's no support there at home. True. So, I mean, like maybe she's having to do that now because her parents don't care. I mean,
and she could be, like, as far as we know, if she's a senior, she could be 18 and be an adult and just like, look, this is I'm not going to college. I'm making this jump. Yep. So,
well, and Ashby, you mentioned, you never really had a crush on any teacher until like college, and I think that begs the question. Kyle, any teacher crushes?
I did for sure. I had
two that I can think of.
I had one in middle school.
One in middle school and one in high school for me.
Paige Hare was
yes, me too. One. Paige Hare and Melody
Tool.
Melody Tool.
Yeah, that was my high school one. I look back on this now because Erica used to work for the Kinley News and called me out on this. But in my senior year, for senior superlative, they asked, where do you see yourself in however many years? And I said, I'll be a rock star and I'm going to be married to Miss Tool. And like that got put in the Kinley News, and my mom was like, "What are you doing? This could ruin this woman's job. Like you're talking about marrying her." And it's like, well, it's just what's going to happen. I mean, it didn't work out that way. I mean, I met Erica and great things.
Clearly, yes.
But Erica was going through the archives when she worked at the Kinley News and saw that, and she's like, "Oh, so who's Miss Tool?" And like, what happened with her? Because all of a sudden she found my senior superlative and wanting to know like this lady was that I was supposed to marry, and it didn't happen. So
that's hilarious. Yeah, I remember.
I guess we had teachers that I was like, oh, well, he's cute, but like I think it's different.
Well,
as a girl.
and honestly, and this is just speaking truthfully, you probably didn't have a lot of male teachers growing up either.
True.
I mean, your choices were Danny Evans.
You can't tell me Pierre Bone was not a stud muffin.
Danny Evans,
Ed Wall. I mean,
Mr. Bone, Pierre Bone.
Pierre Bone. You had Benji. You had Ben Williams. I mean,
that's true. I had Ben Williams, and then the other guy who was a literature teacher who was also a coach.
Doug,
who left.
Doug Williams.
That's right.
Dougie Fresh. Dougie Fresh. Yes,
that was Doug Johnson.
Doug Johnson, not Doug Williams. Doug Johnson.
Even if I had started out with a crush on, I guess both Coach Williams's. I then joined winter track, and they made us do bleacher runs, and that crush would have died.
That'll turn you off
death.
very quickly.
Yeah.
Well, I've just got to do the honors. We can't leave out George Daniels as well.
Yeah, Gary Daniels, yes.
Mm-hmm. That's it. That's who it was for me.
He was a hero. He wasn't a crush. He was a hero.
That's true. He's a prestigious hero.
Of World War.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, goodness. Okay.
All right.
I just think it's hilarious that me and you had the same two. I mean, just... Look, in 8th grade, one of our assignments was we had to interview somebody that we admired, or like someone that was our hero. And me being the suck up I was, I had to pick the teacher who assigned it. It's like, hey, can I interview you? So I sat after school and with like my puppy dog eyes, like asking her all these little questions.
And to being the young middle school person you were, you're like, something's going to happen. You just knew it. Like, you're like, she's going to fall for me. and this is going to work out.
This is it.
Like,
Not
This
even
is my
thinking
moment.
about the implications of what that actually
no,
looks
for
like.
sure. You have
as
no
a-
clue like how horrible that really
No,
is.
no.
But just in your brain as like a teenager, like,
Yeah.
this is my wife. Like, this is about to
Well,
Middle
happen.
schoolers aren't really great with
No,
like,
they're not.
logistics.
Well,
No.
they weren't then. They might be now.
Who knows?
But and then in my senior year, I had Melody Toole, and which like nowadays, I've taught her stepson. I've worked with her on a few things with FCA, and we've talked about like doing stuff through the high school and the churches working together. Like I've had so many years of working with her, but back in high school, like I had her for calculus my senior year. I'm pretty sure I got a C in calculus because I just, wasn't really focused on the the sines and the cosines exactly.
There's still those random moments.
And I know I got on her nerves too. So
Well, like where we've gone and like played music at her church and stuff, and we always see each other and we always talk, but there's always that little part in the
little
back of my
awkward,
mind
like this.
that's like, I was very vocal about having a crush on you in high school.
I don't know how
That
she
must
did.
have been
'cause
weird for you, but is it weird now? Because now it is, because I was vocal about it.
I don't know how she did it, like because she literally started teaching like. She graduated, like, I think, in 3.5 years. She started teaching like when she was like 20 or 21, like, and she's teaching.
So you're saying there was a chance?
I mean, age-wise, whatever. But actually, no, because if you do that, they will fire you.
Yes, don't do that.
That's anyway. But
Illegal and horrible. Don't
exactly. So, what's the next question on the list?
do it. How did this leave you feeling?
This movie?
Yes, not high school, but this movie.
You don't want to know about high school. This movie left me feeling like. So, you told me to save it. Like I didn't really talk about. But before we started on the air, you told me to save it for this. So I'm gonna be honest with you. There's a lot of things I enjoyed about this movie. There's a lot of things I saw in this movie that made me feel things. There was other parts of this movie where I just was trying not to fall asleep. Like it's I can see why people like this movie. I get it. And I have the things I feel strongly about. I feel very strongly about in this movie, where I see the passion, where I see the love you have for students, where I see the love of the arts and the passion I have for that, where I see how his son is growing up, and there's all the things we talked about earlier. I see all those things. I'm very passionate about those things. So I guess to end on like a positive note for me with this movie, it was 2 hours and 23 minutes long, and it could have honestly been an hour and 50 minutes, in my opinion. You could have cut 30-something minutes off this movie, in my opinion. But watching this movie, the thing that it made me feel most was pride that I am a teacher, and hope that I would have the opportunity to touch lives the way this teacher clearly did. So,
How about you, Ashby?
I put this movie made me feel like I'd been sobbing for 5 minutes straight because that's what I had been doing at the end of it.
Same.
The ending got me. It got me good. And I was going to read the full quote at the end, but I can't without crying, so I'm not going to. And I said, it certainly hits differently as an adult when you tip over into your 30s and you're just starting to understand the temptation to look backward more than you used to look forward.
That's really good.
So that's where I'm at.
I think it's very similar for me. I made a note that to me, this is very much, because I've made it vocal about how much I love like Dead Poets Society too. And for me, I feel like this is a musical version of Dead Poets Society for me, where it's a movie that I enjoy, but I don't know that I necessarily enjoy the movie so much for being the movie as I do how much it makes me reflect on my own life. Because as we mentioned, like watching it, I automatically think of Mr. Jackson and the people I spent life with. I think of Eric being a teacher. I think of just my life and how things are. So it's a movie that by its own has good character and has great, moments and everything else too. But the movie itself, as I'm watching it, it's almost as if I'm living through the movie and reflecting and having nostalgic moments while watching this movie.
all right. So I got two things I want to add real quick. These are two additional questions that were not on our script. I'll put you both on the spot.
Okay.
The first question, Mr. Holland clearly really affected a lot of kids as a teacher. Name teachers that you had that played a big part in you becoming the person that you grew up to be. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Okay.
We talked a lot about Mr. Jackson, and we'll talk about him in the social media shout out, so I won't talk about him.
Okay.
But I would say Vicky Thomas, Miss Thomas, who was my sixth grade science teacher. Um, I just had never cared about science before.
Mhm.
And she made it fun. And she looked like Miss Frizzle. And I was that kid who was constantly talking. And I must have been talking a lot to her about what I was reading, which at the time I had just gotten into Harry Potter. And I don't remember talking her ear off about Harry Potter, but I must have because a few years ago we found each other on Facebook and someone had asked her, some of her favorite book series. And she tagged me and she said, one of my favorite book series of all times is Harry Potter, which I never would have gotten into if it hadn't been for one of my sixth grade science students talking about it constantly, about how magical and wonderful it was to the point that I picked it up and read it myself. And I was
Mhm.
like, aw.
You were like, you're welcome.
Mhm.
Yeah. And then I would also say Miss Kaiser, who was my Lit 3 and 4 teacher. So I had her junior and senior year of high school. And she is the reason that I ended up with a literature minor when I went to college because I had thought, I'm going to major in journalism. And then I switched over to business and marketing. But I stuck with the literature minor because I was just so enamored with I had always been a voracious reader, but by the time I got to college, I had realized that literature was something you could study, and there were classes that you could take where you could discuss poetry and books. And, I just ended up taking a bunch of literature courses that I was interested in. And by the time I got to my senior year of college, I had a literature minor through sheer happenstance.
Mhm.
And I don't think that I would have known to do that if it hadn't been for her high school lit courses, because that was the first time that literature went beyond reading comprehension. So, literature had always been a class that I was the only one normally reading the actual material, and then we would take tests on it, and you would, say, yes, I read this, yes, I understood it. We talk about grammar or whatever. But when we got to those final lit courses at the end of high school that we had with her, it was much more about, okay, last night we read this chapter in the book or we read this poem. Let's circle up the desk and just talk about how it made us feel and what it made you think about and how it relates to certain things that are happening in the world and what the cultural relevance of the time would have been. And we just talked about it without any kind of like end goal, like remember this, you'll be tested on this. It was just like, how did this make you feel? And it was a revelation to me. It was amazing. And so her class really changed the course of how I came to literature and reading comprehension, especially moving into college. And then once I got to college and I started taking those literature courses, I ended up in class of a guy who was teaching. It's a long story, but UNC Asheville makes you take certain courses. And so I landed in this course that happened to be a literature course that was a requirement. And I was taking it as a summer course. It was accelerated. We were in there for like hours every day for a month in July. And I would write these papers for this course because the framework for the course was history, but he was coming at it from the framework of literature, and we had to write, you know, these papers for it. And I would turn in these papers and he would turn them back into me. And at the top of every single paper, he would say, "This is amazing. You should major in literature. Come see me. I'll mentor you. I'll be your, academic advisor." And he spent that entire summer course trying to convince me that I should be in the literature department based on my work in that course. And I said, that's not really where I see my future. I'm just really into this. So I'll see your major and raise you a minor. And I ended up taking most of my minor courses with him specifically up into my senior Shakespeare seminar, which was amazing. So there have just been teachers that really stood out to me because they, not necessarily because they were pushing me, but because they, through their own passions and interests, unlocked something in me that I realized that I was passionate about or good in. So those are mine.
All right, Kyle, you want to go next, or do you want me to go?
Okay, I was trying to look up a teacher online just because I hadn't thought about them in a long time. So I was like, I wonder if they're on Facebook. The first one I'll say, and it's funny because it was different, but fifth grade, I think it was social studies, but Miss Edith Boyette,
Boyette,
I don't know why, like I stuttered,
Yeah.
but Boyette, she was just very energetic and was fun, and I needed that as a child, the type of brain and learning that I did. Like, I didn't take well to just sitting and reading a book straight out. I needed that extra little bit of, like, motivation. But I remember her talking about Twisted Sister,
Mm-hmm.
and We're Not Going to Take It. And I remember being like, she had such an impact in my life. Like, whenever I was leaving, I was like, I want to get her a tape with that song on it. I was like, because at the time you could buy tapes, and CDs just were finally making it around. And I remember I found some random tape that's like Monster Ballads or something, like, and so I again I had that song on there, and I remember giving that to her. And part of it was because honestly I didn't do great in her class, but I feel like she was one of the ones that took time out of that to be like, okay, you didn't do great, but let's look at this and figure out how, you were wrong, or let's figure out what the right answer is and like how to improve and do better. So I think the energy part was one of it, and just her caringness that made a difference for me. I hate to like brush over so many, but there's a lot of, I was blessed to have a lot of great teachers in my life. But to go ahead and jump straight to college is one that stands out a lot to me. Her name was Tina Irvin. She was my English teacher at JCC, and she was very much like, I don't know where she was from. You could just tell she probably was not from here. At least I say like locally, like Johnston County. But just her enthusiasm and the way they look at things other than the traditional, here's English and here's the book and here's this. It was very much like, well, what do you feel out of this? What do you get out of this when you read this? Like, how does that make you feel? What do you think about this? Ashby's talking about reading Harry Potter in 6th grade. This teacher assigned all of us to read Harry Potter in college. And she said, I want you to read this. And at the time, there was a big ordeal on TV, like Christians burning Harry Potter books and saying it was the devil and everything else.
It is. I'm just kidding. It's definitely not.
Well, that was.
I read a book that Ashby let me borrow. It's not.
Whoa.
But that was her thing. Was
I love Harry Potter. I'm a Potterhead just like everyone else. So.
But she wanted us to read it, and then we had to write a paper of take a side and explain your side. And then, to be honest, like, she knew I played in Christian bands and everything else. She looked at me and was kind of surprised that I didn't choose the Christian side. She's like, I'll be honest, I was kind of like hoping to see something from that side of it. And I was like, well, I don't think it's right. So I'm not. So I did end up taking it from, she's like, well, write it from that aspect then. Don't just all of a sudden choose the other side. Write it from what you believe and why you believe that. If you know, it's all different than what people on television or whatever are saying. And I also remember something very important. I had her 2 different classes, I think, but at the end of every semester, she wanted everyone to bring in their favorite song and the lyrics to your favorite song. And she would collect all the lyrics and make it into a big book. And then every person in the class got a copy of said book. And then we would take, 2 or 3 days of literally just sitting in class, playing one song and having each person discuss why they really like that song. And this is an English class. It wasn't a music class. And for her to take the time and to show us how much English extends into life and into music. It's not just, books and book reports and everything else, like how this extends deeply into your life. And then the last one, her name was Marsha Mills. I had her in graphic design school. And there's not part of it necessarily about the design aspect, but I will always remember we had interviews. She did the test interviews for whenever you're going to go interview for a job. She wanted us to have that, showing off your portfolio. And side note, like random thing, but do you remember the crash test dummies, like the toys and everything else?
Yeah.
She designed the packaging for the crash test dummies.
That's cool.
Like, so she had that in her office, and I remember staring at that and being like, what is this? She's like, well, I used to work for the toy company, and I would design the packages these things came in. But anyway, we were doing interviews, and she stopped me during mine and said, class, I want you to look at Kyle about this. She said, his personality and the way he comes across in his interview, I would want to hire him just because he comes across as a person I'd want to work with. It's like, and that's without seeing anything he's done yet. And like, I didn't take that arrogant or big-headed, because by all means, my like portfolio compared to a lot of other people's was definitely not great. But it did put that in my mindset going forward in life of whenever you're dealing with people, your personality and how you approach people and how you treat people can say a whole lot more about you before they ever know anything else about you. So even just your personality and talking to somebody shows them the type of person you are before they ever even see anything deeper than that. And just how much that can mean to me. So once again, I took that deeper than what she meant it, but it's something that stuck with me for the rest of my life.
All right. Well, I'm going to try to do as quick as possible here. Fifth grade teacher, Kirsten Huddleston, who I believe got married and is Jenkins now. She was only at micropilot level for 1 year. She actually got engaged on Valentine's Day in our classroom. Her boyfriend at the time came in.
That's awesome.
And proposed to her in front of all her kids. And then I don't know. I think she moved to Virginia after that. So I don't even know what happened to her or if they're still together 25 years later. I hope they are. But she made learning fun in fifth grade. She really, I picked up the habit of wanting to read in fourth grade. Like, that's when I picked up my Goosebumps and Boxcar Children reading habits. But she really pushed me to read outside of my favorites. And she introduced me to some of my favorite books that I read to kids now. Dear Mr. Henshaw, The Giver, Bridge to Terabithia. We read Bridge to Terabithia, and we were trying to learn about foreshadowing while reading that book. And I remember she got kind of mad at me because I was so, like, we read the first 2 or 3 chapters in class, and I was like, I can't wait. I finished the whole book like that night. And she was asking for an example of foreshadowing, and I gave her an example from the end of the book, effectively spoiling it for the other 17 kids in that room. So, but she made reading fun. I learned all 50 state capitals with her, which for some reason was just an accomplishment to me. But I was the first one to do it in class, and she made that like a huge deal. Really boosted my self-esteem. We wrote a book. We had these. We got put in these group projects where we would create like a magazine, and then we would do like a newscast where we'd have like different people reporting on news and weather and sports and stuff that we were learning about, but we had to put it like within our projects. And she just made learning really fun. So she was the first one that came to mind. I'm going to give a shout out to Danny Evans here. Not necessarily for any one specific thing that I learned from middle school, but I just remember the pride I had when he actually was subbing for me at Glen O'Kinley one time. I did not realize he was going to be my sub. He came in. I was actually there that morning setting up the room. And I remember telling him, I was like, hey, here's what I got planned, but you do what you want. You know what you're doing. Sure. I'm not going to tell you what to do. He's like, no, I'm going to follow your lesson. I'm going to follow your lesson plan. And when I got back Monday, he had wrote the nicest note about, how well organized my class was, how much he enjoyed the lesson, how much he enjoyed my students. It's one of my prized possessions. I still have it. I mean, it's just, he subbed for me a few times. I've not been fortunate to get him any in the past few years because he's been subbing at one school mainly, and it hasn't been micro. But just the effect that he had on me as an educator, just, the pride I had when I got that note back, thinking, okay, I've made it now.
Sure.
Like I've got the approval of one of the greats, like literally. And now I'm teaching in the gym where he taught, which is even cooler. In high school, I have a couple. David Bagwell, who was the girls' basketball coach, and he had a reputation amongst some people. But for me, he saw me my sophomore year. And this was after I'd quit band, and I didn't really have a direction. Like I thought, I wasn't like good enough to play like any of the big sports, and I really didn't want to play football because we sucked. And I wasn't good enough to play basketball or baseball at that point because I'd given those up a couple years ago. And he just saw something in me where he just came up to me. I had him freshman year for PE, and I didn't really have much of a relationship with him then. But he came up to me. He's like, hey, I need someone to run the video camera for the girls' basketball team. Will you be willing to do it? And that turned into the next year, hey, would you be willing to do stats? And then that turned into, do you want to do stats and do the starting lineup announcing for the boys and the girls basketball team? And then that turned into me taking classes for Peppy with him. Turned into some coaching opportunities, working with some of his teams over the summer, my freshman and sophomore in college. And again, I don't know if I'd be where I'm at without him just kind of looking at me. And I think he kind of sensed that I was kind of lost my sophomore year. Like, I didn't really have a direction at that point. And I think he saw something, and he kind of put me on the direction where I ended up. And I'm very grateful for the direction he put me on and for the friendship that I gained with him over the years. Ann Pittman and Phil Pittman, both of them. Ann Pittman was my Algebra 2 teacher, and I had her sophomore year, and she was someone else who, I don't know if it was just stuff at home. Like, I had, we had adopted my youngest brother and sister when I was in 6th grade, and I don't know if it was just hitting me like when I was 15 that, my parents really have their hands full, and that it's not that they didn't care about me, but they had their hands full with the 2 youngest and then my other brother who was younger than me, and I was kind of forced to grow up a little early. And so I was slacking on stuff, and Ann Pittman really called me out on it like the first or second week in school, like, hey, you're better than this. Like, you can do better than this. I expect much better than you, because I know, like, I see what you're doing. You're not trying. You're not working hard, and I'm not going to let that fly. I'm going to be on your tail all year long if you don't get it together. And I mean, I didn't really expect that. Like, I was taking honors algebra 2. The year before I had taken geometry, and I bombed geometry, and that was partly because I couldn't see the board, and I was too scared to tell anyone I couldn't see. So I didn't know how to write proofs because I couldn't see because I sat in the back row. So, like, my mom had to fight for me to get in honors algebra 2 because of my grades the year before. And I sat in the front row that year. And I had glasses at that point. And Ann Pittman was like, yeah, you can do better. And I did. And I ended up with like a 99, like on the Algebra 2 exam. Like she told me at the end of the year, it's like, I told you could do better, and you did. And so she just kind of put a work ethic in me. Phil Pittman got me interested in history and civics. I mean, and he was a coach. Ben Williams was someone who I never had as a teacher, but he was my coach. And he was my advisor, like my homeroom guy, but I never had him as an actual teacher. But just the effect he's had on me, like through the years, where I had him as an advisor for 4 years, and he was a coach, and then we kept in contact while I was in college because he coached my brother. And then when I became a teacher, he became an administrator. Like, we kept in contact through different events through that. And now he's in Wilson County Schools, but every time we see each other, like, it's just, mutual respect there. But he was someone who always just kind of checked on me and made sure I was good to go. And then last but not least, in college, at Barton, we had 2 main phys ed instructors for the PE majors. We had one who made me feel like crap, and we had another who really encouraged and built me up, and that was my academic advisor, Dr. Dawn McCrum. And I remember specifically, I don't know what it was, but she saw something in me, and she really kind of just gave me a confidence boost. My sophomore year, I just really hated Barton. I had a couple of friends there, but I was looking to transfer to ECU so I can go and be at the school that the girl I was dating was going to at the time. And she looked at me and she's like, "Why would you want to leave here?" And I was like, "Well, I don't fit in." She's like, "Why don't you fit in?" And like, she kept probing me, and she's like, "Well, if there's something going on, I need to know." Like, and I was like, "I just don't feel like I belong." She's like, "Well, why not?" Like, she would not let me off the hook. And she's like, "If you want to go to ECU, that's fine. Just understand you're going to be a number there. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you've already gotten, you've gotten used to being one of 8 here. Are you really willing to go be one of 50 there?" And for some people thrive on that, but she knew that I did not. She knew I would have not succeeded in that environment, and so she pushed for me to stay. I did. It was the best decision I ever made, at least career-wise, not financially. But she was fantastic, and I remember the first time that she came to observe me when I was student teaching, and I was teaching a volleyball lesson. I still have the write-up she gave me. where she had marked all of my stuff 4s. And she's like, I don't usually do this on the first observation, but you nailed it and knocked it out of the park. And when I was the last one in my graduating class who could not find a PE job, she helped me. She called me every other day, like, hey, have you tried this? Have you done this? She wrote letters of recommendation for me. When I finally got my job, I mean, she was over the moon for me, and she was just someone who was very special. So Dr. McCrum would be my last one.
She gets a 4.
Yeah, she gets a 4.
All 4s.
Real quick, my last question, then we can jump into social media shout-outs. Robert Jackson, band pieces. He was another one that we didn't mention because we're going to talk about him in a minute anyway. So I remember we played The Tempest, we played Men in Black, and we played You'll Be in My Heart from Tarzan. Those are the things.
I was jealous.
Those were the ones that specifically stuck out to me as the most memorable pieces we played. So.
There's one that Christina Aguilera did. And it's from a movie, and maybe a Mulan. I don't remember.
Reflection.
Yeah. Yes, that's the one. That's the one that stands out in my mind. And I think it was important, like, because it wasn't a traditional piece. It was something that was modern and happening in that time period that made me realize, like, hey, a saxophone isn't just for old traditional classical music. Like, it can be used in everything.
Yeah. Mine was definitely Tempest, and I'm pretty sure that we did My Heart Will Go On.
Nice.
I want to say we did.
I feel like
don't
we
know
did that one too, from Titanic.
Yeah.
Yes. And then also one year that was part of our concert, we did Barbara Ann by the Beach Boys.
Oh yeah, we did that too.
And it was
we had
so fun.
And we had someone on an actual drum set doing the dun 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 dun.
Yes, and I think he had the drum section start us out with Wipeout.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh.
Don't tell Ricky.
It was so much fun.
Don't tell Ricky. All right, let's do social media shout-outs.
Okay, literally, it was originally for me. I posted it out on the internets to say, hey, what are your thoughts on this movie? What memories do you have? And it literally just turned into a giant praise for Mr. Robert / Bob Jackson.
It really did.
so-
Appreciation post.
Yes, so
Yes.
here we go diving in.
Diving deep into the Mr. Jackson post.
First off on Instagram,
right.
Anna Wells said, Mr. Jackson, middle school band, showed us this movie or scenes of it. I definitely remember watching it with him and then seeing it again later as I was a little older and sobbing. Darla Peden commented, awesome movie, yes, Mr. Jackson. Let's get back to Facebook. Here we go. Robert Conway. And whenever I did it on Facebook, I tried to tag people that I remembered being a part of band, especially with Mr. Jackson, of different ages and ranging. So I didn't tag everybody in the world, but I got a variety. Robert Conway said, Mr. Jackson was a great music teach and always reminded me of him when I see this movie or hear the name of it. I remember he had us watch it a time or two. Daniel Taylor said, this hits the nail on the head. I could not possibly watch or even think about this movie without thinking of Mr. Jackson. He is the reason of my love of this movie, and Richard Dreyfuss actually reminds me of Mr. Jackson. What a great post, because this hits close to home for me too. Mr. Jackson would push us to the max, to perfection really. I owe so much to him. Ashby jumped in and said, this movie always makes me think of middle school band. Definite parallels here between Mr. Holland and Mr. Jackson. One year we were playing The Tempest, which is a piece meant to sound like a hurricane. As we started playing it so well, he got excited and ran over and started flickering the lights off and on like lightning and shouting, yes, that's it. He was so tough on us, but nobody got more excited when we nailed it. Anna replied 100%. Danielle Taylor did the crying face. Crystalline Goodling said, this always makes me think of him. Such an amazing teacher, always pushing us to do better. Holly Matthews says, Mr. Jackson was the best. He always expected more in the best way. Anna Wells said, agree, and when he got angry, you just felt awful. He always pushed us, and I'm grateful for that. Dawn Hayes said, yes, yes, yes. Mr. Jackson has definitely pushed us all to our limits, and we were successful no matter the grade level. For someone like him, he is one of the reasons, for someone like me, he is one of the reasons I pursued music and education, because I was so deeply influenced by his passion for what he did. I believe he deserves a Lifetime Achievement Award for all he's done for us. Daniel Taylor tagged Mr. Jackson, take a look at all this love. He responded in all capital letters, you guys, with a heart. He says, You will be in my heart and soul forever. The best times, I mean it. And then he did a gif of Baby Yoda and said, "You the best," or "Yoda best."
Yoda best.
Along with some others, always commenting back about him being the best. It's cool whenever. This reminds me of times when you're just with a group of friends and you sit around and the next thing you're reminiscing about the good times and how you start to realize how much of an influence somebody had on your life and you didn't really know it or acknowledge it until that moment. But with Ashby, what she said about him running and flicking the lights and getting really excited, it brought back all these memories of times that honestly we sucked and he would get angry because he knew we weren't practicing and we weren't giving our best. And it wasn't that he didn't care for us. He just knew we could do better.
Yes.
And he was so much the same way that whenever we finally did come together and it sounded really good, he made sure that he was so excited about it. He didn't fake it. He just really could not stand still and was just very passionate in making sure you knew how much or how well you were doing it and how much you appreciated it. And, you know, even if we would have played an auditorium and got no response other than him, it was worth it. I don't know. I'm stumbling over my words at this point. But
yeah, Robert Jackson was amazing. And I love how a movie that I didn't really want to review. I was not going to be on this originally. And, it, you know, obviously I saw it honestly, seeing the responses referring back to Mr. Jackson is what got me to like, okay, I will find the time to watch this movie so we can talk about it, just for nothing else, so we can talk about Mr. Jackson.
mm-hmm.
You know, and you I think you hit the nail on the head. I remember sometimes with that baton was not safe.
I thought it was going to break. Right
like
now.
Sometimes it did. I mean, but
Yeah. Look, I was clarinet. I was first, second row. Like that baton was coming at my head.
But he was at a time when, as a student, you know, you didn't really know all of your teachers' passion for their subject necessarily, but you knew his.
Mm-hmm.
I can honestly say that I'm not involved in music nowadays if it wasn't for him.
Mm-hmm.
My love of music would have never taken off without the 4 years I had with him. The passion I had for it would not have been the same. He played a pivotal role in that. It would have been a much different journey for me in life without music. And, I went from instrument to vocals, and now I'm doing a little bit of mix of both now. I don't think I could have done that. I don't think I could have done vocals without the love I would have had for the instrument part of it, and knowing how to read the music that way. And just the passion he had for it, you fed off that energy, you fed off that excitement. He would build up our trip to Carolina for the marching band. I remember hearing about that trip every single year. And then when I finally was a freshman in high school, like getting to participate at Kenan Stadium, a band competition there, and just, it's magical. It's hard to put into words how much he really meant to our growth as people. And that was just with 4 years. That was 6th through 9th grade for me.
Well, that's something that stands out to me is to think about between the three of us. He had maybe 3 to 4 years of our lifetime, 2.5 to 4, somewhere in there. And that's it. But to stop and look at that and realize how much of a difference he made in our lives in individual tiny little ways that tweak things and how things change and everything else, to the point, like, every once in a while I try to do that where I look back and see how one thing's affected every other thing, to the point that if I didn't get into music and I never picked up a guitar, I never would have been in the band and I never would have met Erica, like my wife. Like, now there's tons of other ways, whatever you want to look at it, if you want to look at it that way. But I always look back at that, and it makes me think that each day that you live your life, you can have an effect on someone else. And you never know the 20 seconds that you take to hold a door for somebody, or to buy somebody a meal, or just to say a kind word, how that little bit of time can affect their life for the rest of their life, and how that can snowball and grow. And so not to take your life for granted. I know sometimes we get repetitive and it's the same old in and out. And even especially in the COVID world of being stuck at home sometimes, we live in such an advanced world that we can always reach out to people. We can always make an effort to get involved and just be kind to people, and just to share your passions with other people. because, for him taking a moment, anywhere from 2.5 to 4 years of our lives, just in a classroom setting for the most part, he changed our lives forever. So, I mean, how much more of a difference, too, can you make in someone else's life, too? I don't know. Something to think about.
Well,
Ashby. No, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Ashby, if you have something you want to add here. But I was just going to say, whoever does our social media post on Monday, make sure we tag him.
Okay.
And Mr. Jackson, if you made it through the 2 hours and 4 minutes of this podcast, this is going to be one of our longest podcasts ever. If you've made it this far, thank you for everything you've done for us.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so we've made it to the end. Yeah, who'd have thought Mr. Holland's Opus was going to be one of our longest episodes of all time?
Did not have this on my list. No. I figured we were
didn't see that coming.
Last week, Ant-Man took an hour and 13 minutes, and I thought, wow, we're really getting in the groove of this. A Marvel movie took less than an hour and a half. We're really getting good at this. Mm-hmm. And here we go. 2 hours later, we're still talking about Mr. Holland's Opus, a movie I did not even want to review. I texted my friend Ashley earlier today, and I'm just going to read the text I sent her. And just so y'all can laugh at it now. Let's see. Also, I get why people like this movie, but I'm bored. I mean, it's about a guy who hates teaching and ends up making a difference. I saw it once in the 90s because our band teacher showed it to us in class. I honestly have no idea why we're reviewing this movie.
I'll be honest, you texted Ashby and I yesterday, and I saw your name pop up, and I didn't read it. I left it there for a good half hour. I was like, I know what that message says. That message is from Eric saying, I don't, you guys are just going to have to do this one by yourselves. I don't have the time, or I just don't care to do this. This is something I don't care about. You guys go ahead and do this.
I almost did.
So I literally left my phone on my desk. It kept popping up and showing, like, new text from Eric Creech. I was like, no, I know what that says. I'm not going to read that. Because it's going to say, I'll have the stuff set up. You can just come to the house and do it. It'll be okay. It'll be fine without me. I just don't care about this. And then here we are, over 2 hours deep into this.
It's crazy.
Here we are.
Ashby, did you want to plug some current people, organizations?
Yeah, I just wanted to do a little plug at the end because I know that, like you said, sometimes we have certain attitudes that we even don't realize we have about differently abled people. And one of the reasons, or one of the ways we overcome that is through media and pop culture. And so I know that there are a ton of things that you can Google about different organizations that are, promoting and representing the deaf community and deaf culture. It affects over 70 million people worldwide. But I wanted to mention 2 actors who are deaf that I follow on Twitter. There's Shoshannon Stern, who's the creator of This Close on Sundance TV. It's about best friends who are deaf and working to balance personal and professional lives. And she also recently wrote a New York Times article called Mothering While Deaf in a Newly Quiet World. And that's I believe she's Irish, or her name is Irish, so I'm going to spell it out for people. It's Shoshannah. So I think it's Shoshana, and then Stern. And then there's also Niall DeMarco. He's an actor and an activist. He's the executive producer of 2 Netflix docuseries. One is called Deaf You, and one is called Audible. And then he also has a really interesting Now This video pinned to the top of his Twitter profile about deaf culture and community awareness that you can watch. That's really interesting. So I just wanted to shout out those 2 people. And Niall also kind of has a different name. So it's Nyle, and then DeMarco is Dimarco, if you're interested in, more information or following 2 people who are very much a part of and promoting this community.
And I'll throw in a third. This is an actress who I first saw on Community. She played a love interest of Abed in season 5. Her name is Katie Lynn Leclerc, and you may also know her from Veronica Mars, The Big Bang Theory, and she was also in Switched at Birth. She was not born deaf, but she did learn American Sign Language at 17 before she found out she had, I believe it's pronounced Meniere's disease, which led to her hearing loss. But she's another one, Katie Leclerc, someone to look up as well. So.
Cool.
All right. Well, a big thank you to Ricky Lyles for all of his contributions to our podcast in today's episode. And we hope that you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did, that you're as pumped for our journey on to the pop culture road. Just so excited for everything we have in store for you. Next week, this is hilarious to me. So like last year, we did the best love songs. It was just me and Kyle. And Kyle would tell these beautiful stories of, how each love song, he played a part in his life. And Eric was like, well, I don't have any love. I'll just pick these 5 songs that sound cool to me. Well, this year, we're in my realm, buddy. We're going to bring your tissues, break out your crying Dawson memes, from Dawson's Creek, because we're revealing our favorite breakup songs, and it may bring up some unpleasant memories for everyone.
For sure.
Me and Ashby have already talked about the fact that we're going to have to limit ourselves to one Taylor Swift song
each.
Just one. The rest will make our honorable mentions. I've narrowed it down to 6. I got to get it down to 1 by next Thursday. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you stay as cool as the other side of the pillow. Make sure you support the arts program at your local schools, and we will see you next week on the What the What podcast. Bye.
What the what?
Bye.